Welcome back, Night Wanderers, to Nakora Nights. Tonight, we're venturing into the quiet small towns of Appalachia, places that look peaceful by day, but after dark, they hide horrors the locals never speak of. These are 9 true small-town horror stories, encounters that made residents question reality, homes that whisper when no one is there, shadows lurking in back alleys and empty streets, figures appearing at windows, then vanishing without a trace, and strange happenings that still baffle the police. Before we step into these towns, I need to know, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because some of these horrors only emerge after midnight. If you're brave enough to stay through all 9 stories, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. I survived Appalachia's small towns. Now, turn off your lights, grab your headphones, and watch carefully. This is 9 untold most disturbing true Appalachia small-town horror stories. Let's begin. Story 1. I never believed silence could scream until that night. It begins softly, like a memory that shouldn't resurface, and ends with the sound of something you'll never forget. For years, I've tried not to talk about what happened. Even now, I wake in the dark, heart hammering, sure I'm still searching for him. Sometimes, I smell the wet pine from that place, or hear the echo of boots crunching on gravel. The mind never lets go of the things that broke it. Back then, life was simpler, or maybe I just thought it was. I lived with my 2 brothers in a small town outside of Charleston, West Virginia, a patch of quiet farmland where the nights were blacker than coal and stars looked like holes burned in the sky. We grew up on stories about old mines, railroad ghosts, and vanished hunters, but none of them prepared me for the truth hiding in those hills. It was late September, the kind of Sunday that makes you believe summer might last forever. The air smelled like dried leaves and diesel. My brothers and I decided to drive out to the Hollow Creek Fall Fair, a small-town festival tucked deep in the Appalachian hills. It was famous for its antique car show, and we loved old engines, always had. We spent hours under hoods as kids, fixing junkyard Chevys until our knuckles bled. I was 23 that year, my older brother 26, and the youngest barely 20. We loaded into the truck before sunrise, laughing, teasing, and arguing over which car might win the blue ribbon. The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding through mountain roads where fog drifted like ghosts between trees. I remember the radio cutting out, the signal dying as we crossed into the hollow, no cell service either. Out there, your phone might as well be a paperweight. The town of Hollow Creek looked frozen in another time-old brick storefronts, faded paint, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a single gas pump that probably hadn't been replaced since the 70s. The fairgrounds were set beside a river, a thin ribbon of water glinting through the trees. We parked in a grassy lot near the woods, a half-mile from the main square. To reach it, we had to cross 2 wooden bridges, creaking and narrow, the kind that sway under your steps. It was mid-morning, the sun warm, the sky cloudless. Everything felt safe, ordinary. Then she appeared. She came from the tree line, walking toward us with uncertain steps. A woman, maybe in her late 30s, dark hair brushing her shoulders, wearing a red sweater that stood out against the green of the hills. She smiled, small and careful, and when she spoke, her voice carried the faintest tremor. "Excuse me," she said, "I'm looking for the festival." "Could you help me?" Her tone was polite, but something in her eyes made me pause. You could hear the music and laughter floating over the river. The fair was right there. She had to know where it was. My older brother shrugged. "We're heading there," he said. "Just cross the bridge and you'll see everything." She frowned, almost like she didn't understand. "I'm actually looking for a specific part," she said. "The Heritage Barn exhibit." "Do you know where that is?" The name was familiar. The barn was at the far end of town, away from the main crowd. My youngest brother, always the helpful one, said, "I can walk you there. It's not far." I wanted to stop him. Something about the woman made the air feel colder. But my older brother clapped him on the shoulder and laughed. "Go on, just meet us at the car show after. We'll be by the old Chevy stand." He nodded and followed her down the bridge. That was the last time we saw him. We spent hours wandering through rows of classic cars, polished chrome gleaming like mirrors. People talked, music blared, and time slipped away unnoticed. It wasn't until noon that I checked my watch and felt the first twinge of worry. He should have been back. At 1 o'clock, we began to search. No sign of him. At 2, the panic set in. We tried calling, but of course, no signal. We found a payphone near a food stand and dialed again. His phone rang but went unanswered. By 5 in the evening, the fare was thinning out, the crowds leaving, and the shadows growing long. We searched the whole town, calling his name, checking the barn, the diner, even the old bridge. By 7:45 p.m., the fairgrounds were nearly empty. The laughter had faded, replaced by the distant rush of the river and the crack of branches in the wind. A park ranger told us to leave. The grounds were closing. When we explained, he frowned and radioed it in to the local police. He promised to keep watch by the lot in case our brother showed up. We drove to a cheap roadside motel and waited, leaving messages that would never be returned. By morning, it was clear he was gone. We filed a report, handed out flyers, searched every road, every cabin, every hollow. Weeks turned to months. Then the pandemic hit, and everything stopped. Searches, volunteers, leads, all gone. The silence that followed was worse than any answer we could have gotten. Every night, I stared out at the hills and swore I could hear him calling. Years passed. I tried to move on, tried to work, tried to live. But some wounds don't heal. They just hide beneath the skin. Then, one cold December night, the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to the Hollow Creek police chief. "We found him," he said. "You need to come down here." The drive back felt endless. My brother and I barely spoke. The chief met us outside the station. He looked tired, older, haunted himself. They'd raided a trailer on the outskirts of town after neighbors reported screams and gunfire. Inside, they found drugs, weapons, and one small back room that smelled of rot and bleach. That's where they found him. He was alive. Barely. Barely. The hospital lights made his skin look gray, his body thin as paper. Tubes ran from his arms. His eyes opened slowly when he heard my voice, and I'll never forget the sound he made, a broken gasp that was half a sob. When he could finally talk, he told us everything. The woman had led him down a narrow road behind the old feed store where 3 men were waiting. They beat him, tied him, and threw him into the back of an old ice cream truck with peeling paint. He woke up in the trailer, chained to the floor, and for the next 4 years, that place became his world. They drugged him, starved him, and sold him. He tried to escape twice, but each time they caught him, they made him wish he hadn't. The woman, the one in the red sweater, was never caught. The men said nothing about her. The trailer was torn down, but people still claimed to see her walking near the bridge at night, asking for directions. After his rescue, my brother changed. He barely spoke, barely slept. Sometimes, he'd stand by the window, staring into the dark. When I asked what he saw, he'd whisper, "She's still out there." Months later, I went back to Hollow Creek to collect his things from the hospital. The town hadn't changed. Still quiet. Still the same rusted signs and old tracks humming faintly when the wind blew. Locals said it happens sometimes, the rails humming before a storm or before someone dies. That night, I stayed at the motel again. I couldn't sleep. Around 2:17 a.m., I heard gunshots echoing from the hills. 3 shots, then silence, then silence. They say people still hunt deer out there, but the season ended long ago. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed I was home again. But when I walked through the door, something was wrong. The house was spotless, untouched, but every detail looked just as it had a decade ago. A photo on the wall showed the 3 of us smiling at the fair, but when I looked closer, the woman in the red sweater was standing behind us. I woke up gasping, the sound of the river still rushing in my ears. Some nights, I still drive out past Hollow Creek, stopping by the bridge where it all began. The boards creak beneath my boots, and the wind carries faint laughter from the trees. Sometimes, I swear I see her reflection in the river, her smile soft and kind, as if she's still asking for help. If you ever find yourself in a forgotten Appalachian town where the roads narrow and the air smells of rust and pine, be careful when someone too friendly stops to ask for directions, because sometimes kindness is the oldest trap of all. I still remember the night the whisper started. It was the kind of sound you can't explain, the kind that settles in the back of your skull and waits, patient as a shadow. For years I thought it was a dream, a half-memory from the lonely hills of Cold Hollow, West Virginia. But the truth came later, when I realized it had never really stopped whispering. It had only been waiting for me to listen again. I was 24 when everything changed. I'd spent most of my life in Cold Hollow, a town small enough that you could walk from the diner to the post office in 6 minutes if you didn't stop to chat with anyone. Everyone knew each other's names, habits, and sins. The winters hit hard here, thick snow swallowing the mountain roads until you felt trapped in a white silence. Folks either stayed and worked the land or left for the cities beyond the ridges and never looked back. I stayed. Farming wasn't what it used to be, but it was what I knew. My father had worked these hills before me, and his father before him. Our family owned a small patch of land north of town where the fields rolled toward the woods. That was my world. The sound of crickets in summer, the rattle of tractors at dawn, the smell of diesel and wet earth clinging to my hands. Back then I had two best friends, Micah and Trent. Micah was a year younger, always grinning, always dragging me out for late-night drives down the logging roads, headlights slicing through mist. Trent was different, calm, sharp-minded, the kind of guy people listened to. He worked at the sawmill just past the river, fixing heavy machines. He had plans, real ones, saving money for college, maybe a place in Charleston. That summer felt good. I was with a girl named Lacey, and we'd started talking about a future. Micah was working as a lifeguard at the town pool, and Trent was making enough to finally pay off his truck. The world felt steady. But the mountains don't like steady things. They have a way of shifting underneath you, slow and silent, until one morning you wake up and everything you trusted has cracked open. By the time the leaves started turning red, it was all falling apart. Lacey left town without a word, Micah's girlfriend went away for college, and Trent quit his job. He said he'd found something better, something higher. I thought he meant another mill or maybe a mining company over in Glenview, but when he stopped by the farm one night, I saw a light in his eyes that made my stomach twist. He talked about God, about cleansing, about the end of false faith. We were sitting in my family's old barn throwing darts and drinking warm beer. The place smelled like oil and hay, the air humming with crickets. We need to get right with God, he said. Not halfway, all the way, all the way. It sounded harmless at first. We'd all grown up in church pews, hearing about sin and salvation. In a town like Cold Hollow, faith was the same as oxygen. You didn't think about it, you just breathed it. But Trent's voice had something else in it that night, something sharp. He said he'd been praying in an old chapel outside of town, a brick place that hadn't been open in years. He wanted me to come. I didn't want to. But a week later, after a long day fixing tractors, I said yes. I guess part of me still hoped faith could fix what was breaking. That night was cold. The church sat on a hill surrounded by pines. When we walked inside, the air was stale and heavy, like the building had been sealed for decades. Candles flickered on the altar, even though no one else was there. We knelt in the back pew. Trent prayed loud and fast, words tumbling from his mouth like water rushing downhill. He asked God to show me a sign. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft as wind through grass. She's coming back. The voice wasn't his. It wasn't mine either. It was something else, close to my ear, inside my skull. I froze. My chest went tight. I looked at Trent, but he didn't seem to notice. "Did you hear that?" I asked him. He frowned. "Hear what?" I didn't answer. That night, I drove home with my radio off, listening for the voice and the hum of my tires. Weeks passed, and Trent changed more. He stopped fixing machines, stopped seeing anyone but Micah and me. He said he could feel evil in people. He'd touch a doorknob or a Bible and flinch like it burned him. He said he could see things, Once, during a storm, he stood outside my house with his arms raised to the lightning, yelling about angels. He said they'd told him the world was rotting from the inside. Micah and I didn't know what to do. We tried to talk sense into him, but the more we pushed, the further he drifted. Then came the letters. One morning, the mail showed up in our box, even though the post office had burned down the week before. Everyone in town knew about that fire. It had gutted the place, turned it to ash. But somehow, the envelope still came. Perfect handwriting. No smudges, no burn marks. My first one was from my father. The problem was, he'd been dead for 6 years. I stood in the kitchen staring at it, the edges cold under my thumb. Inside was a single line, "You'll hear her again soon." Micah got one too, signed by his grandmother who died when he was 10. We showed them to Trent. He smiled like it made perfect sense. He said the dead were only silent to those who stopped listening. That's when I started keeping a diary, trying to make sense of things. But after a few nights, I realized something strange. Every morning, the last page changed. My words were gone, replaced with things I hadn't written, things that hadn't happened yet. Micah cuts his hand on Thursday. Blood on the floor. 2 days later, it happened exactly that way. I tried to throw the diary out. I burned it in the fire pit behind the barn. But the next morning, it was back on my nightstand, pages clean, waiting. Then there was the knocking. Every Friday, just past midnight, someone would tap 3 times on the front door, always 3. Always the same rhythm. When I opened it, no one was there. Once, I stayed up with a flashlight staring through the curtain. At 1:07 a.m., the knocks came. A tall figure stood at the edge of the porch, face lost in shadow. He spoke softly. "I'm looking for the one who used to live here." Then he was gone. I told Trent about it. He said the man was a messenger. He said I shouldn't fear him. He told me to listen next time. By then, Trent wasn't working, wasn't eating right. He'd moved into an old cabin near the quarry, said he needed solitude to hear God clearly. Micah and I went to check on him once. Inside the cabin, symbols were carved into every wall, circles, lines, crosses that didn't look holy. There were candles everywhere, melted down to puddles of wax. He was sitting in the center of it all, Bible open, whispering to himself. He looked up at us and smiled. "You came." We told him he needed help, but he just laughed. He said help was already on the way. A week later, Micah's mother called me crying. Micah had disappeared. His truck was still parked outside his trailer, but the door was open, lights on, TV buzzing, static. The sheriff searched for days, but the only thing they found was a letter on his pillow, written in that same perfect handwriting, "He's been chosen." After that, I stopped sleeping. The diary kept rewriting itself. It told me things I didn't want to read. It said the visitor would come again. It said not to open the door this time. It said he wasn't asking for the person who used to live here anymore. He was asking for me. The next Friday, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off. I watched the clock tick past midnight. At 1:05 a.m., the knocks came. 3 slow, heavy taps. I held my breath. The voice spoke through the wood. "I'm looking for the one who writes." I didn't move. At 1:06 a.m., the diary opened by itself on the table. Words began to appear on the page, one by one. "He's here for you." Then I heard another sound, from the back of the house, someone whispering my name. I ran. I drove through the mountain roads until dawn, engine roaring, fog swallowing the headlights. I didn't stop until I reached the next county, where the air felt thin and the sunrise painted the ridges in gold. I tried to rebuild my life there. New job, new number, no contact with anyone from Cold Hollow. I didn't even tell people my real name. For a while, it worked, until one day, a letter showed up in my mailbox. The handwriting was perfect. The return address was blank. Inside was a single sentence: "You can't leave what listens." I burned that letter too, but sometimes I still wake up to faint tapping on my door. Always 3 knocks. Always on a Friday. And once, just before dawn, I heard a whisper near my ear, soft as breath. "She's coming back." That's when I realized it was never about God or Trent or the burned post office. It was about whatever waits behind the voice, something that doesn't die when you stop believing. Sometimes, when I drive past the edge of town, I see lights in the old chapel again, glowing through the trees. I don't stop, I just keep driving, the voice humming faintly under the engine noise, saying my name again and again, patient, familiar, almost kind. And every night, before I fall asleep, I write one last sentence in my new diary, the one I keep hidden in a locked drawer. If these words change by morning, you'll know it found me again. Because no matter where I go, it always knows where to write. I remember the night it started. The air was heavy with that kind of silence that only small mountain towns carry after dark, the kind that presses against your chest till you feel it breathing with you. Our house stood alone on the edge of Merrow Creek, a forgotten place tucked between black ridges and fog that rolled in like ghosts. It was the kind of town where everyone waved but nobody really talked, where people vanished into their porches at dusk and locked their doors early. Folks said it was peaceful, but I know better now. Peace can hide awful things. When I was 17, I lived there with my parents, my little sister June, and my grandmother we all called Mama Ruth. Our house wasn't much. A sagging two-story cabin cut in half like it couldn't decide whether to stand or fall. My folks and June and I stayed on the first floor, while Mama had the back half with her own tiny kitchen and a window that faced the tree line. The second story was locked from the outside, used only for storage since before I was born. My father said it wasn't safe up there, the floorboards soft from years of damp and silence. I never questioned it, not until later. That summer, my parents worked at the mill 2 towns over. Long hours, late nights, so it was mostly me and June left alone. I used to think of those days as quiet ones, but now, when I replay them, I see all the little warnings we missed, like red lights blinking in the fog. The soft creaks we brushed off as pipes, the objects we thought we misplaced, the prickling sense that eyes followed us in every mirror. It began with the footprints. Mama was the first to notice them. I was helping her unpack groceries one humid afternoon, the kitchen window open to the sound of cicadas. She stopped mid-sentence, her hand frozen around a jar of pickles, and whispered, "Look there, boy." Her voice was thin as paper. I turned and saw faint dirt smudges along the wall beside the pantry door, like someone had walked sideways up it, heel, toe, climbing toward the window that stood slightly open. I tried to laugh it off, saying maybe Dad leaned against it fixing the gutter last week, but Mama's face said otherwise. Her skin looked pale beneath the flickering bulb, her eyes fixed on the prints like she could hear them breathing. "Close that window, Jonas," she said quietly. Now, I did, and we locked the pantry door too, though we never used that lock before. That night I couldn't sleep. The house talked like it always did, moaning and settling into itself, but now it sounded different, too alive. Every groan felt deliberate, every thump a whisper just outside my door. Around 2:17 a.m., I thought I heard soft steps over the creaking floor, measured and patient. I held my breath till morning. A week later came the first time I heard the footsteps outside. It was late, June was asleep, and I sat reading by my lamp. The night air pressed against the window, thick and still. Then I heard it. A soft crunch on gravel near the back porch. My pulse stuttered. Another step, then another, slow, dragging, like someone testing each footfall. I froze, my hand on my phone, but something told me not to move. The steps stopped, leaving only the hum of insects and the heavy stillness of the woods. Minutes passed. Finally, I pushed aside the curtain. The yard was empty. But then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The old ladder that had leaned against the shed now stood beneath my sister's window. At breakfast, I told my parents. Dad frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Probably just some drunk from town," he said, though he didn't sound sure. Mom avoided my eyes, but Mama sat silent, her spoon hovering over her coffee. That afternoon, she pulled me aside. Her voice trembled, something I'd never heard before. "There's something wrong with that man across the road." Across from us stood a crooked house that looked abandoned even when it wasn't. Its porch sagged like a tired sigh, its windows yellowed with grime. The man who lived there was called Merritt Dunn, though most folks just called him that feller. He was quiet, always half hidden behind his curtains. People said he used to teach at the old schoolhouse before it closed after the fire, but no one knew much else. Mama leaned close and whispered, "I seen him watching us," from his window. At night. My stomach turned cold. "Watching what?" I asked. Her gaze slid to June's window. Us. It wasn't long after that when strange things began happening around town again. Someone found the old schoolhouse doors wide open, even though the place had been boarded up for decades. Teenagers who went inside for dares said every photo they took came out wrong. Everyone's face blurred except for one child smiling in the background. The sheriff laughed it off, said it was camera tricks. But folks whispered, and when you live somewhere small enough, whispers are louder than church bells. Then one morning, the town's welcome sign changed. It used to read Population 482. Now it said 483. Everyone noticed. Nobody spoke of it. Later that week, Old Man Porter died in his sleep. By the next morning, the number was back to 482. It felt like the whole town was holding its breath. Then came the break-in. It was early, maybe around 3:11 a.m. I woke to the sound of shattering glass, sharp and bright like a gunshot. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then it came again, followed by a low creak. I leapt from bed, heart racing. Through the curtain, I saw a figure in the yard. A man, tall and thin, holding something heavy in his hand, a brick. He was facing the house, shoulders twitching, his breath misting in the cold. I knew that shape. Merritt. Merritt. He turned his head and our eyes met through the glass. His face looked hollow, eyes wide and fevered. For one heartbeat, we just stared. Then he dropped the brick and bolted for the trees. By the time the police came, he was gone. They searched the woods, followed prints, found nothing. My father was furious, my mother shaking. The sheriff said Merritt had been in trouble before, drinking, theft, fights, but never anything like this. They found him days later, hiding in an abandoned shed by the old railroad tracks. He didn't resist. But what they discovered inside his house made even the sheriff turn pale. Piles of garbage and torn clothes, and under them, boxes of stolen things, our old sweater, a kitchen knife, June's hairbrush, and notebooks. Dozens of them. Pages filled with nonsense. Drawings of eyes, maps of the forest, and our names scribbled again and again. On one page, near the bottom, written over and over in shaky lines, "She's always alone at night." June's window faced his house, and she always slept with her curtains open. We moved out before fall came. The mill closed, the fog thickened, and people stopped walking the roads after dark. But the story didn't end there. Sometimes on quiet nights, folks say you can still hear Merritt's voice drifting through the fog calling out names. Once it says yours, you stop dreaming. I never wanted to believe it. But a few years after we left, a neighbor mailed us an old photograph found in Mama's attic. It showed the front of our house, the one we'd left behind. My parents and June and I stood on the porch smiling, but behind the screen door was a blurred shape. Everyone's face looked normal except for one child, clear as day, grinning from the shadows. No one remembered ever seeing that child. It's been 15 years now. I live far from those mountains, but sometimes I wake in the dark, my heart pounding. Sure, I heard gravel crunch outside my window. I tell myself it's nothing. But last week, on my drive home, I passed an old wooden sign half swallowed by weeds. It read, "Welcome to Marrow Creek, Population 483. The fog rolled down from the hills that night, and as I slowed to read the sign again, I thought I heard it whisper, my name. I never thought much about living alone. I just did. It wasn't a choice I made for peace or freedom. It just happened one small decision at a time until silence became the only sound I trusted. My name's Clara, and 5 years ago I moved to a quiet patch of nowhere in the Appalachian Hills, the kind of place that didn't show up right on maps. People here called it Cold Hollow, though I swear the air always felt too still for a name like that. I worked at a small roadside diner, an old red building squeezed between a gas station and the last standing church. The locals came for eggs and gossip, and I learned quickly that in a town like this, quiet was its own kind of language. My house sat at the edge of town, close enough to see the streetlights, but far enough that when the power went out, I was the only one who noticed. For the first few months, life was painfully predictable. Wake up, feed my cat Junie, drive down the winding road to work, serve coffee until dark, drive home, repeat. It was the kind of rhythm that could make years disappear. But then small things began to shift, like the rhythm had changed before I noticed. It started one morning in late September. I drove to work before sunrise, fog draped across the hills like spilled milk. That's when I saw it, a new road sign standing at the corner of Maple Hollow and Miller Road. It wasn't there the night before. The metal looked brand new, the paint still shining. It said only one word, home. I slowed down, confused. There was no house down that way, just woods that went on for miles. I thought maybe the town put up a new sign for hikers, though no one ever hiked here. Still, I brushed it off, told myself I was tired, drove on. The next morning, it was gone. Not bent or fallen, just gone. No holes in the ground, no signposts left behind. I remember laughing to myself, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank. But the laugh didn't feel real. It felt like something trying too hard to sound normal. A week later, the weirdness came closer. I started noticing someone sitting at the far booth of the diner every time I worked. Always the same man, always the same seat near the window. He ordered tea, never coffee, and stayed until closing. The others joked he was one of those mountain ghosts that wandered down when the fog rolled in. I laughed with them, but his eyes followed me every time I turned. His name was Mason. Or at least, that's what his receipt said. He spoke softly, his voice slow and heavy, like he was testing every word. At first, he just asked normal things. If I liked living alone, if I ever got scared up there in the hills, I told him no, though that wasn't true. The first real warning came the night I worked a double shift. The diner emptied around 9, and I stayed behind to mop the floors. When I stepped outside to lock up, I saw a figure standing across the road near the church. The lamps flickered, and I realized it was Mason. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even blink. Just stood there under the crooked cross that hung over the church doors. By the time I got into my truck and looked again, he was gone. That night, I lay in bed listening to the creaks of the old house. Junie sat at the end of the bed, ears twitching. Around 2:17 a.m., she lifted her head and hissed, staring at the wall behind me. I froze. The sound came next, slow breathing, shallow at first, then matching mine, in and out, until it didn't. I shot out of bed, turned on every light, checked every room. Nothing. Just me, the cat, and that cold silence pressing in from the woods. I told myself it was the pipes. It was always easier to believe that. The next morning at the diner, people whispered about something strange. Old Miss Dunbar said she heard church sermons through the loudspeakers near her house, even though Pastor Willis had been dead for 10 years. Others said they heard it too. His same sermons, word for word, the same trembling tone. I laughed nervously, but I knew what fear sounded like, and it was in every one of their voices. 2 days later, I heard it myself. I was closing up the diner when the sound of a microphone crackled faintly from the speaker near the parking lot. The same familiar old drawl filled the night air. Brothers and sisters, the Lord sees what we bury in the dark. My skin went cold. The power box was disconnected. I checked it every night. That was when Mason walked by the window, slow and deliberate, glancing in like he knew I was listening. When I got home, the road sign was back. Same spot, same word, but this time, the paint was smeared, like someone had dragged their fingers through it. I thought about calling the sheriff, but in Cold Hollow that never helped. The nearest station was 2 hours away, and the last time someone called about strange noises in the woods, they never came at all. So I did what I always did. I ignored it, went to work, kept my head down. Then the favors started. My yard was cleaned up one morning, leaves raked into neat piles. The next week, the porch steps were freshly painted, though I hadn't bought paint. Then one night I came home and found my front door unlocked. Junie was fine, but her food bowl was full even though I'd emptied it before work. It wasn't a break-in, it was something worse, someone making themselves comfortable. The next evening, Mason came into the diner again, but this time, he didn't sit at the window. He came right up to the counter and said, "You should keep your door locked, Clara." My heart stopped. I wanted to ask how he knew, but I couldn't form words. He smiled then, slow and wrong. "You live up by the ridge, right? Near the radio tower?" "I like it up there, peaceful." He left before I could answer. That night, I sat awake until dawn, clutching a kitchen knife, every creak of the floorboards setting my nerves on fire. When I finally slept, I dreamt of the sign again, except now it pointed toward my house, and under the word home were new letters, faint but visible in the moonlight. "He's already inside." The next day I went to work early, desperate to be anywhere else. But when I arrived, something felt wrong immediately. The diner's lights were on, even though it was still dark out. I peeked through the window and saw Mason sitting in his usual booth, a cup of tea in front of him, steam still rising. The clock read 5:14 a.m. We didn't open until 6. I stepped back, heart pounding. How had he gotten in? When I finally went inside, the door was unlocked. The air smelled faintly of pine and something metallic. Mason didn't look up when I approached. "It's time you gave me something in return," he said quietly, "for all I've done for you." I whispered, "What are you talking about?" He tilted his head, still smiling. "You'll see." Then he stood and walked out, leaving the tea steaming on the table. I called the sheriff's office that afternoon, but the line rang forever. Later that evening, I found the road sign again, this time at the end of my driveway. It was dark when I got home. I parked my truck, but before I stepped out, I saw movement in my window. A shadow, tall and still. Junie hissed again, her fur rising. I stayed in the truck until my headlights flickered off on their own. By then, the front door was open. I remember every second of what happened next, even if I wish I didn't. I grabbed the tire iron from behind the seat and stepped out, forcing my breath to stay even. The night was dead quiet except for the faint hum of power lines. I crept up the steps, pushed the door open. The living room looked untouched, but Junie's food bowl was empty now, and there were muddy footprints leading to the pantry. I followed them slowly, the floor creaking under my weight. Junie growled from behind me, low and guttural. I tightened my grip on the iron. The pantry door was open just enough for the darkness to spill out. I reached for the switch, and then I heard it breathing, close, deep, not mine. I swung the tire iron into the dark. It hit something soft, followed by a dull thud. Mason crumpled out of the shadows, blood running down his face. I stumbled back, my vision spinning, heart racing so fast I thought I might pass out. He mumbled something, voice wet and broken. "You said this was home." I called the sheriff again, shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. They said someone had already reported Mason acting strange around town, that they were looking for him. They arrived 20 minutes later, took him away in cuffs, though I never saw him again after that. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every creak sounded like breathing. Every flicker of light felt like someone watching. Then one morning I woke up and saw a new sign outside my house. The same shiny metal, the same painted letters. It didn't say home this time. It said, "Welcome back, Clara." And I swear I heard the faint crackle of the loudspeakers outside, Pastor Willis's voice whispering through the static. "Brothers and sisters, the Lord sees what we bury in the dark." Junie hissed again, and I finally understood. Whatever had come for Mason hadn't left with him. I didn't move for a long time after that night. The sign stood outside my window like a monument, metal glinting in the gray morning light. The words, "Welcome back," Clara, burned into my eyes every time I blinked. I wanted to believe it was another cruel prank, maybe the sheriff's idea of a joke, but the way it shimmered in the dawn made my stomach twist. It looked too new, too clean, as if it hadn't been made by anyone human. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't go to work. The diner called twice, then stopped. The silence stretched longer, heavier. The air in Cold Hollow changed too. The fog came earlier, settled thicker. The birds that used to sing outside my window vanished. Even Junie stopped eating, sitting instead by the pantry door, tail twitching as if waiting for something. On the fourth night, I decided to leave. I packed only what I could carry, some clothes, food, Junie's carrier, the tire iron, and locked the house one last time. The road leading out of town wound like a ribbon through the trees, and I thought if I could just reach the main highway before sunrise, I'd never look back. But Cold Hollow doesn't let people leave that easily. The fog grew so thick I could barely see the road ahead. I slowed down, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then, through the mist, I saw the faint outline of a sign on the shoulder. My chest tightened. I didn't want to look, but I had to. It was the same metal sign, the same black letters. Home. I pressed the gas harder, but no matter how far I drove, it stayed there ahead of me, always the same distance away, like the road was folding in on itself. The fog swallowed everything beyond the headlights. I turned around, heart racing, only to find the road behind me gone, nothing but an endless stretch of pale smoke and shadows. By the time I saw the church lights through the fog, I was shaking so badly I nearly drove off the road. The church was supposed to be abandoned. No one had used it since the fire that took Pastor Willis 10 years ago, but now the front doors were open and a warm glow spilled out onto the dirt. Against every ounce of reason I had left, I stopped the truck. The second I stepped out, the air grew colder. I could hear faint whispers, overlapping voices that rose and fell like wind through hollow pipes. Junie hissed from her carrier, pressing against the back corner. I picked her up, clutching her close, and climbed the steps. The doors creaked when I pushed them open. Inside, the church was filled with people, or what looked like people. They sat in the pews, heads bowed, faces pale like wax. Every one of them turned toward me at once, eyes hollow and glistening. At the pulpit stood Mason. His head was bandaged where the iron had struck him, but his smile was the same. He lifted a hand, beckoning me forward. "You came home, Clara." The voice wasn't his. It came from the loudspeakers mounted high on the walls, old and rusted, the same ones that had broadcast the dead pastor's sermons. The sound was broken, distant, like someone speaking through layers of dirt. I stepped back, clutching Junie tighter, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Mason's smile widened as the congregation began to hum, a low, vibrating sound that filled my chest with dread. Then the lights flickered and the preacher's voice returned. "Brothers and sisters, tonight we welcome her back to the fold." The pews emptied in silence. They moved as one, their steps slow and in rhythm, the sound of bare feet scraping the floor. I turned and ran, the church doors slamming shut behind me. Outside, the fog pulsed with strange light. I stumbled toward the truck, heart pounding, fumbling for the keys. But when I looked up, the truck was gone. In its place was my house. It sat exactly where the church should have been, porch light glowing softly, the new sign planted in front. Home. I fell to my knees, sobbing, clutching Junie like she was the only thing keeping me real. Then I heard footsteps behind me, slow, dragging. Mason's voice echoed through the fog, soft and calm. "You never should have left." I ran. I didn't care where. The woods swallowed me, branches scratching my arms, mud pulling at my shoes. The air grew thicker, heavier, filled with the same whispering hum I'd heard in the church. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I realized I could still see the glow of my porch light through the trees. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape it. I must have wandered for hours. My legs ached, my lungs burned, and Junie had gone silent in her carrier. Then I saw something ahead through the trees, another sign, half buried in the dirt. It said, "Cold Hollow, Population 1. That's when I understood. This place didn't exist on any map because it didn't need to. It existed for whoever it chose, wrapping itself around them until there was nowhere left to go. Mason hadn't followed me here. He had been part of it all along, just another piece of whatever the Hollow wanted. The sun never came up that night. The sky only lightened to a sickly gray, the fog never lifting. I tried walking until my legs gave out, but every path led back to the same house, the same porch light, the same door waiting open. I stayed outside until I couldn't feel my hands, until Junie's faint breathing stopped against my chest. I buried her under the birch tree behind the porch, tears freezing on my face. When I turned back toward the door, it was already open again. Inside, the air smelled like pine and old paper. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. I saw movement in the corner figures, faint and translucent, watching me from the edges of the room. Their faces were blank, their eyes too wide. The preacher's voice crackled through the house speakers once more. "Brothers and sisters, the Lord sees what we bury in the dark." I covered my ears, but the sound came from inside my head now, his words pressing against my skull. The walls trembled, the floor shifted, and I realized the breathing was back deep and rhythmic, coming from beneath the floorboards. I picked up the tire iron again, heart hammering, and tore up one of the planks. Beneath it was dirt, freshly turned, and under the dirt, pale fingers reaching upward. I screamed and ran for the door, but when I opened it, I was back in the church again. The congregation waiting. Mason smiling. "You can't leave, Clara. You are one of us now." The last thing I remember was the sound of the preacher's voice whispering close to my ear, cold and steady. "Welcome home." I woke up to birdsong. Real birds this time, morning light spilling across the windows. Junie's bowl was full, her food untouched. My hands were clean. My clothes were dry. It took me a moment to realize what was different. The world outside the window wasn't cold hollow. It was another town, smaller, brighter. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd escaped. Then I saw the sign across the road. Brand new, Cold Hollow, population 2. And as the church bell rang in the distance, the loudspeakers crackled to life once more. "Brothers and sisters, the Lord sees what we bury in the dark." I smiled then, even though I didn't want to, because the voice was my own. I never thought the world could hold anything truly evil, not the kind that breathes and waits, not the kind that learns your name. I used to laugh at ghost stories, the ones folks whispered around fires or passed down through family lines like old warnings. I wanted proof, something I could touch. That was before Lorne Valley took everything from me, before I stopped sleeping through the night, before I realized the dark doesn't always wait outside your window, it finds its way in. My name is Isaac Turner. I grew up in Lorne Valley, a town that barely clings to life somewhere deep in the Appalachian Mountains. You'd miss it if you blinked while driving by. The roads are narrow, cracked, and lined with pine trees that bend in ways that make you swear they're listening. My father worked at the sawmill until his lungs gave out from dust, and my mother left when I was 10, claiming she couldn't take another winter of silence and superstition. I stayed because I didn't know anything else. Lorne Valley had its rules, unspoken but understood. You didn't wander the woods after sundown, you didn't go near the old quarry, and you damn sure didn't ask about the people who went missing. There was always a reason, they said. Bears, bad weather, wrong place, wrong time. But the truth was something else, something no one wanted to see. It started one December evening. My friend Mason had come over, same as always. We'd sit in my basement after work, drink cheap beer, and pretend life wasn't choking the air out of us. That night, though, he wasn't himself. His hands kept twitching, and his eyes darted toward the basement window every few seconds like he expected to see something staring back. He stopped the music, stared at the floor for a long time, and said, almost too quietly, that something had been following him. I thought he was drunk or joking, but then he described it. The footsteps that circled his house at night, the sound of breathing outside his window, deep and ragged, like something struggling to stay alive. He said sometimes he'd hear tapping on the walls, one side, then the other, as if whatever it was wanted him to know it could move faster than he could think. I laughed it off, told him it was probably a stray dog or raccoon, but he didn't laugh. He looked up at me, pale as bone, and said, "You ever hear something walking above you when you know you're alone?" I said no, and he nodded slowly, like that was the answer he expected. I told him I'd help him figure it out. That was the first mistake. A week later, I started hearing things too. It began subtle, just this pressure in the air when I'd be walking home, that feeling you get when you're being watched. I'd stop and turn, but the road behind me would be empty, just wet asphalt and tree shadows swaying under the yellow glow of the streetlight. The air always smelled like iron, heavy and cold. Then came the footsteps on the roof. Heavy, deliberate, never fast. I told myself it was just an animal, but the weight of it, the rhythm, it felt wrong. The sound moved slowly from one side of the roof to the other, and then it would stop right above my room. That was always the worst part, that waiting silence, as if it were listening back. One night I heard it tapping on the window, soft at first, then faster, then it would stop. Then it came again from the opposite wall like it was circling the house. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard faint scratching, as if nails or claws were dragging along the wood. I tried to ignore it. For days I told myself it was my imagination. But when I heard whispering outside my window one night, I knew it wasn't. The sound was faint, like a broken radio signal, words I couldn't understand, something guttural, almost human, but not quite. The longer I listened, the more it began to shape itself into a rhythm, a tone that felt intentional, as if the sound was learning how to speak. The next night, it whispered my name. I froze in bed, eyes wide, staring at the curtain that hid the window. I wanted to look, but couldn't move. Then came the breathing again, deep and wet, inches away from the glass. I lay there counting every shaky inhale, every exhale that sounded more like a growl. By the time the sun rose, my sheets were soaked in sweat. I went to Mason's house the next day, and the look on his face told me I wasn't alone. He looked hollow, like something had been feeding on his sleep. When I asked if he still heard it, he just nodded and said it had started coming inside. He said he'd woken up 2 nights ago to find his bedroom door open, even though he was sure he'd locked it. And when he turned on the light, he saw something tall standing in the corner. He couldn't make out its face, just the shape taller than any person should be, its head bent sideways as if its neck couldn't hold it up. He said its eyes didn't shine, they absorbed the light instead. We decided to catch it on camera. We set up an old camcorder in my room, aimed at the window and let it run through the night. We told ourselves we just wanted proof, but deep down, I think we both wanted it to not be real. The next morning, I watched the footage. For the first few hours, nothing. Just me shifting in bed. Then, around 2:17 a.m., the camera caught movement. A shadow rose up outside the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of light, but then it stood, tall and thin. It leaned closer to the glass, and though the camera lost focus, I could see enough. The face, if it even was a face, had no eyes. Just dark sockets that seemed to sink forever inward. Then came the tapping. Slow, deliberate. The thing leaned in closer, and for a split second I swear it smiled, not with a mouth, but with the tilt of its head, like it knew we were watching. The camera cut out right after. That night, I didn't sleep. The tapping came back, fainter this time, almost playful. Then my bedroom door creaked open at 3:14 a.m. I turned my head slowly, and there it was. A silhouette taller than the doorway, its body too thin, its breathing wet and heavy. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The next morning, I packed a bag and left Lorne Valley. I drove until I ran out of gas 2 towns over. I told myself I wouldn't go back. But Lorne Valley doesn't let go that easy. A month later, I saw something strange on the local news feed. Sheriff's dispatch recordings had leaked online. They were from the same week I left. The tape played the last words of hikers who'd gone missing near the quarry. You could hear the wind, their footsteps, and then one of them whispering that something was following them. Then static, then breathing. The bodies were never found. I knew that breathing. People said it was a hoax, that someone faked it for attention, but Lorne Valley doesn't need hoaxes. It has history. Back when the quarry still operated, there was a legend that whoever dreamed of the quarry would disappear within a week. At first, folks thought it was just a miner's tale, but then workers' names started vanishing from the schedule. No record, no pay slips, like they'd never existed. My uncle used to say the quarry wasn't abandoned. It was sealed shut to keep something inside. After that, strange dreams came to me. I'd wake in a cold sweat with the image of dark water and a narrow shaft of light sinking deeper into black stone. The next day, I'd find new scratches along my window frame, like something had tried to get in again. I went back once. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe guilt. The town hadn't changed. Same peeling signs, same crooked church steeple, same air that smelled like wet iron. The quarry was fenced off, but someone had cut through the wire. I stood at the edge, staring down into the pit. The water at the bottom was still, too still, and I could swear I saw ripples spreading outward even though no wind touched the surface. As I turned to leave, I heard the sheriff's radio from a patrol car parked nearby. Static hissed, then a faint voice came through, breathing, then whispering my name. I froze. There was no one inside the car. That night, I stopped at the old diner on the edge of town. I sat by the window, trying to steady my thoughts. The neon sign flickered red against the glass. I looked at my reflection, just to make sure I was still myself. Then I saw it. My reflection moved its lips, but I hadn't said a word. I stared, not breathing. My reflection leaned closer, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Then, faintly, I read them, "Behind you." I turned, and the lights went out. When I woke, I was lying on the floor. The diner was empty, the sign outside still buzzing faintly. My head throbbed, and when I looked back at the glass, my reflection was gone, just blackness staring back. I left Lorne Valley for good after that, or at least I tried to. I moved states away, changed jobs, stopped talking about it, but some nights, when everything's quiet, I hear it again, the tapping, slow and patient, like it knows I'm still listening. A few weeks ago, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. It was static at first, then faint breathing, then a whisper that sounded like Mason's voice. He's been missing for years. Sometimes I wonder if this thing ever stopped following me or if it just waits for me to remember it. I used to think monsters weren't real, that all the stories people told were just fear wearing a different face, but I know better now. I learned the hard way that some things don't need belief to exist. They only need you to notice them, and once you do, they notice you back. So if you're ever driving through the Appalachians and you pass a town called Lorne Valley, keep going. Don't stop for gas. Don't look in the diner window. Don't listen to the radio if you hear static turn into breathing. And if you wake up one night and hear tapping on the glass, whatever you do, don't look, because it's already looking at you. I was 19 when it happened. I'd come to the town of Ravens Hollow, a place folded deep inside the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog clung to the trees like breath on a mirror and the nights were longer than they should be. The kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts echo off the hills and start to wonder if they were still your own. Back then, I was just a junior in college, chasing a degree that no longer matters. My name's Jacob Reed, and I wasn't from there. Nobody who came to Ravens Hollow ever really was. The town sat about 10 miles off the main highway, a cluster of buildings that hadn't changed since the 1950s. It had one bar, one grocery, and one road that led in and out. And the people, they didn't like outsiders. They'd look at us, the college kids, with eyes that carried something older than hate, a kind of quiet resentment, like they knew something we didn't. They smiled with tight lips, muttered under their breath, and went on living in their ghost of a town. The stories we'd heard about them were strange. People said when someone left Ravens Hollow, their house rotted overnight, but only from the inside. It was the kind of rumor we laughed about over cheap beer and late-night cigarettes. But no one ever proved it wrong. I should have known better than to go to the Widow's Lantern, the only bar in town that let students drink alongside locals. That's where I first heard about Jonas Crow. They said Jonas hated college kids, especially ones like me, young, curious, and too dumb to understand what fear really meant. The locals said he'd once worked in the coal mines until something happened down there. A cave-in, maybe. Others said he'd seen something buried in the dark that changed him. Whatever it was, Jonas never left town again. He spent his nights drinking and fighting anyone who reminded him of the world beyond Ravens Hollow. The week before it happened, Jonas nearly beat a student to death in the bar's parking lot. The police didn't do a thing. The owner didn't even call it in. In Ravens Hollow, Law was a whisper, not a rule. So when Saturday came, I decided I wasn't going to let another one of us get hurt. I told my friends, "We'll teach that bastard a lesson." I didn't mean to start trouble, but trouble had already found us. That night, before heading out, I stood in my dorm room looking at myself in the cracked mirror. My father had been a mechanic, tough, practical, never scared of anything. He used to say, "If someone tries to break you, make sure they hit steel." I took that advice literally. I wrapped a few old magazines around my stomach, held tight with duct tape, like armor. Then I slid an empty beer bottle into my coat pocket. It wasn't a weapon yet, but it could be if things went bad. At 7:45 p.m., we walked into the Widow's Lantern like we owned the place. Smoke drifted through the air, the jukebox hummed an old country tune, and every set of eyes followed us as we sat down. We left one chair empty, pretending not to notice the hush that rolled across the room. Jonas showed up half an hour later. He didn't walk, he prowled, slow and deliberate, like a wolf that already knew who it was going to bite. He wore dirty flannel, sleeves rolled, a scar curling down his jaw like a snake. His hands looked heavy, like they were built for breaking things. He dropped into the empty chair beside me without saying a word. The bar seemed to inhale and hold its breath. He reached over and grabbed my thigh, his grip iron hard, testing me. His eyes, flat, pale gray, stared into mine. My friends froze. The music kept playing, but it sounded far away, like it was coming from underwater. I smiled, calm, the way my dad had taught me to when dogs bared their teeth. "Well, you're friendly," I said, keeping my voice steady. He didn't blink, didn't smile, just squeezed harder. Then I spat the tobacco juice I'd been holding in my cheek right into his eye. The reaction was instant. He jerked back, roaring, hands flying to his face. That was my moment. I swung, my fist landing square against his throat. He fell back, choking, the chair crashing to the floor. Someone shouted for us to take it outside, but I barely heard it. Jonas was already up, fury burning in his eyes. We spilled out into the alley behind the bar. The cold mountain air bit at my skin, the moon hanging low and yellow between the trees. The only sound was our breathing, thick clouds of it turning white in the dark. Jonas spat blood, smiled through it, and said, "You think you can beat me, boy?" His voice rasped like sandpaper. He came at me fast. His fist caught my shoulder, hard enough to rattle my bones. I swung back, hitting his jaw. He didn't flinch. I felt the panic crawl up my throat. He was bigger, stronger, meaner. He punched again, aiming for my gut, but the magazines took the hit. His knuckles hit paper, not flesh, and he looked confused for just a second. That was all I needed. I grabbed the bottle from my pocket and swung. It shattered against his temple, the sound sharp and hollow, like a church bell in the cold. Jonas stumbled, blood dripping down his cheek, but he laughed. It was the kind of laugh that didn't sound human anymore. He lunged again, and that's when I heard the gunshot. The sound froze everything. The echo bounced off the alley walls, then died, leaving only silence. From the far end of the alley, a man stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't a cop, he wasn't a local, I recognized. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, face half hidden, but I could see his smile, a small, cold thing. "That's enough," he said. Jonas turned to him, eyes narrowing, anger draining into something else, something that looked a lot like fear. The stranger tilted his head, like studying an insect. "You've had your fun, Jonas. Time to go." Jonas's face changed. All the fight bled out of him, and that's... He didn't argue, didn't snarl, he just nodded. Then he turned and walked away into the dark, blood still running down his face. The man looked at us, tipped his hat. "Best get inside, boys." Then he walked past, disappearing like smoke. We went back inside, shaken. The bar had gone silent, everyone pretending nothing had happened. No one spoke about it. Not the owner, not my friends, not even the locals. But something had changed. Jonas still came to town, still drank at the bar, but he never touched another student again. And sometimes, late at night, I'd see him sitting alone, staring down that same alley, like he was waiting for someone or something to come back. Then, one morning, he was just gone. No note, no search, no body. And no one ever mentioned him again. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. A week after Jonas disappeared, I started noticing things. When people moved out of Ravens Hollow, their houses began to rot overnight, but only from the inside. I saw it myself one morning while driving to class. A house that had stood fine the day before now had collapsed floors, blackened beams, and windows fogged from within, like something had breathed on the glass. At 2:17 a.m., I woke to tapping on my dorm window. Faint, slow, deliberate. When I looked, there was nothing. Just the reflection of my own terrified face. The next day, the store owner in town, old Miss Carter, refused to take my cash. She said the serial numbers were stained with blood. She wasn't joking. The bills had reddish smears on them, dried into the texture like old fingerprints. She said, "You shouldn't have gone looking for him, boy." Some debts don't wash off. I didn't understand what she meant until I found the handprints on my ceiling. Fresh, warm, too big to be mine. That night, I dreamed of the man in the coat. He stood in the alley, gun in hand, whispering something I couldn't hear. Behind him, Jonas's eyes glowed faintly red. When I woke, there was mud on my shoes. I don't go back to Ravens Hollow anymore. I finished school somewhere else, far away, where the fog doesn't whisper and the trees don't creak like they're breathing. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the bottle breaking. I still see Jonas's blood on the snow. And I still wonder who that man really was. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits the window just right, it sounds like a knock. Slow, measured, familiar. Like someone waiting to come back inside. I never expected my senior year to end the way it did. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs, should have known that Caleb was more than just another restless soul trying too hard to look fearless. But at 17, you don't think about those things. You don't believe the people you laugh with, smoke with, and dream with could carry something that dark inside them. I grew up in a place called Blackridge Hollow, a forgotten town buried deep in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains. The kind of town where fog rolls in like breath from an old mouth, and the hills whisper things if you stay quiet long enough. Everyone knew everyone, and every secret was just another rumor waiting for the wind to carry it. Life there was slow, dull, predictable. At least that's what we told ourselves. But even back then, there were strange things no one talked about. Every newborn in town stopped crying at the same exact second each night, as if the whole place inhaled and held its breath. People said it was nothing, just coincidence, but no one ever wanted to be awake when it happened. And once a month, on the same night, a storm would sweep through, always sudden, always violent, carrying whispers in the wind that didn't sound like thunder. My mother used to close every window and light a candle, murmuring prayers she didn't quite believe in. I'd ask what she was afraid of. She'd just say, "Storms in Blackridge Hollow never come alone." That was the world I came from. And that's the world that gave me Caleb. Caleb was different from everyone else in school. While the rest of us talked about leaving town or getting out, he seemed to feed on the darkness that lingered there. He said he didn't need a world beyond Blackridge Hollow because everything he wanted was buried right beneath it. At first, I thought it was just talk. I thought the black clothes, the symbols he carved into his notebook, the talk of spirits and bargains, all of it was just his way of being dramatic. He'd laugh at church kids and call them puppets. He'd sneak into the woods behind the old mines and dare others to follow. Most didn't. I did. I guess I liked danger back then, or maybe I just wanted someone to see me. Then there was Shane, Caleb's best friend. Shane wasn't like him, not at first. He came from a home where his father was a ghost and his mother was a bottle. He had a soft voice, a sad smile, and eyes that carried storms of their own. He followed Caleb like a shadow, even when he didn't agree. The three of us became inseparable. We were the kind of kids who hung out behind the gas station, smoked cheap cigarettes, and made promises under flickering streetlights. We talked about how much we hated that town, how we'd burn it down if we could. It felt harmless. Words are easy when you think you're invincible. But then came that night. It was late October, the air sharp with the promise of Halloween. Caleb told us he was throwing a party. He said it with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. My parents didn't care where I went anymore, so I said yes. His house was on the far edge of town, near the woods that swallowed sound. It was one of those newer builds, standing too clean against the rot of old Appalachia. 2 stories, a long porch, and a smile that hid something broken inside. The kind of place that pretended to be safe. That night it was packed. Kids from school, some drifters from nearby towns, and even a few older guys who looked too worn to belong. There was beer, smoke, pills, and music loud enough to drown your conscience. But Caleb promised something more. He said there would be a surprise. Everyone laughed, expecting fireworks or a prank. I wanted to believe that too, but when I looked at Caleb's eyes, wide, gleaming, almost feverish, something inside me twisted. It was close to 1:43 a.m. when he called us down to the basement. The music upstairs faded to a dull heartbeat as we descended. The basement was dim, half-finished, with walls lined by old wood and the smell of damp earth. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly as if it had already seen too much. Everyone stood in a rough circle. Caleb and Shane were near a door at the far end, one I hadn't noticed before. When Caleb opened it, the air changed. Cold, metallic, heavy. Inside, tied to a chair, was a woman. I knew her. Everyone in Blackridge Hollow did. Her name was Miss Ada, the woman who lived behind the diner, always talking to herself, collecting cans, muttering about the things that came with the wind. People said she was harmless. People said she was crazy. Now she was gagged, terrified, her eyes wide and wet. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Caleb smiled, not the playful grin I knew, but something else. Something hollow. He said, "Tonight we honor the king beneath the hollow." Shane pulled out a handful of darts, his hands shaking as he forced a smile. Someone laughed, nervously, thinking it was a sick joke. Caleb took the first dart and threw. It hit Miss Ada in the shoulder. She flinched, a muffled cry escaping her gag. Some of the crowd gasped. Some looked away. Others laughed. Then Shane threw one, hitting her near the collarbone. My stomach turned to ice. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. My legs refused to move. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't rebellion. This was something else, something ancient and cruel. Caleb raised his voice, saying, "The king demanded a vessel, a soul marked by the storms." I didn't understand, but his eyes burned like he'd already made his choice. Shane opened a black bag and pulled out a long knife, dull but stained. The others started murmuring, unsure whether to run or stay. The air felt thick, like breathing through water. I said, "Let her go." Caleb looked at me, expression soft but sharp. He said, "You don't get it, Grace. This town was built on a bargain. Every storm is a reminder. We just forgot who we owe." Then thunder rolled outside, though the sky had been clear minutes before. I felt the house tremble. Upstairs, someone screamed. The storm had come, the one that always arrived once a month, always on the same night. Wind howled through the cracks, carrying whispers that weren't the wind. Caleb began to chant, words I didn't know, low and rhythmic. Shane's voice joined, unsteady but obedient. The others backed away, their fear turning to paralysis. Miss Ada writhed, gag muffling her screams. Then, someone, a girl named Mara, whispered near me, "I'm calling the cops." She had her phone hidden in her jacket. I stood close to block her from Caleb's view while she dialed. My heart hammered like a drum. Meanwhile, Caleb drew a circle on the floor with white chalk, placing Miss Ada inside it. The whispers outside grew louder, almost human. The light flickered. Caleb raised the knife. Before he could bring it down, sirens wailed outside, flashing red and blue cutting through the stormlight. Tires screeched on the gravel drive. Panic spread like fire. Caleb turned toward us, face twisted, screaming, "Who called them?" I didn't wait. I lunged at him, shoulder first, knocking him off balance. The knife clattered to the ground. Shane reached for it, but I was faster. I cut through the ropes around Miss Ada's wrists. Chaos erupted. Some ran for the stairs. Others froze, sobbing, screaming. Miss Ada ripped the gag away and let out a scream so raw it silenced everything else. Then the basement door burst open. Police flooded in, guns drawn, shouting commands. Caleb tried to run, tried to explain, but they tackled him to the ground. Shane followed, trembling, tears streaming down his face. The rest of us, the audience to madness, stood like statues. The storm outside broke into silence, the whispers fading into nothing. The aftermath blurred. Caleb and Shane were arrested, along with Caleb's older cousin who'd been filming. They found evidence, not just from that night, but from before, tapes, photographs, rituals. It turned out this wasn't the first time. There had been others. Missing people from nearby towns. Strange symbols found carved into trees near the mines. Caleb claimed he'd been chosen, that he'd heard the king beneath the hollow since he was a kid. He said the king lived in the storm. He said the motel at the edge of town, the only one Black Ridge Hollow had, was built over the first altar, and that every guest who stayed there got the same room key. Room 9. No one knew what that meant. But the cops did find a locked trapdoor beneath Room 9. No one talks about what they found down there. In the end, Caleb was sentenced to life. Shane got 20 years. The cousin got 12. Miss Ada lived, but she never spoke again. I left Black Ridge Hollow the day after graduation. I changed my number, moved across the country. I told myself I'd never look back. But sometimes I still hear the whispers when storms come. Sometimes I wake at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of babies crying, even though I live nowhere near a town. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I hear Caleb's voice, calm, steady, almost kind, saying, "It's not over." Because the storm always comes back, and so does what rides inside it. Last month, I saw something online. A review from a traveler passing through West Virginia. He said he stayed at a place called Black Ridge Motel. Said it was cheap, quiet, and the man at the desk gave him a key that didn't look right. The number carved by hand. 9. He said he woke up in the middle of the night to whispers outside his window. He said every baby in the town had gone silent at the same time, and then the storm came. He didn't finish his review. They say the police found his car by the road, engine running, door open, key still in his pocket. The key to Room 9. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I think I hear it too. The whisper that drifts through the wind, the same one that haunted Black Ridge Hollow. It says, "We are not gone, we are waiting." And every time the thunder rolls, I remember that night, the circle, the knife, the storm, because in Black Ridge Hollow, nothing ever really ends. The storm always finds a way back, and so do they. I never believed silence could hum until I moved to Harrow Creek, a small town folded deep in the Appalachian hills. I came here to escape noise, but I found something that listens back. The first night I arrived, the air itself felt wrong. The crickets stopped whenever I stepped outside, like they were holding their breath. I remember looking at the old church on the hill, its bell tower leaning slightly, a rusted cross cutting through the twilight. I thought I saw someone standing there, but when I blinked, only fog remained. My name is Jonah Red, and I wasn't born here. I came from the coast, where storms roared louder than hearts, and I thought I could outrun my life by moving inland. I took a job at the town's repair shop, fixing radios and clocks, though most clocks here didn't work anymore. The people said time stopped mattering after the mine closed 20 years ago. That's what they said, but none of them ever looked me in the eye when they did. The first thing I noticed was the clocks. Every single one, whether in homes, shops, or even on the church tower, was frozen at the same moment, 2:17 a.m. It was the kind of detail you can't ignore, yet everyone acted like it wasn't real. I'd ask about it, and they'd shrug, saying it must be humidity or bad wiring, then quickly changed the subject. At first, I laughed it off. Superstition runs thick in old mountain towns. But then it started happening only when I was alone. I'd fix a clock in front of someone, see it tick, hear the rhythm return, and the moment they stepped away, it froze again at 2:17 a.m. I started writing it off as fatigue or nerves, but the feeling crept deeper, like something unseen was watching through the gears. The townsfolk were polite but hollow, their smiles stretched too long. The only ones who talked freely were the old men at Marner's Bar, a dim place with cracked wood floors and a jukebox that played songs no one remembered recording. I'd go there after work just to feel less alone, but they had stories, long ones, winding like the roads outside town. One night, one of them told me a story about a traveler who stayed in Harrow Creek too long, and when he left, he took something from the town without knowing it. When he said that, I asked, "What did he take?" The man smiled, eyes glimmering under the low light, and said my exact next words before I even spoke them, word for word, the same tone, the same breath. I froze. He laughed, saying it was a bar trick, but I saw his hand tremble. After that, I started hearing whispers in my apartment. Not voices, more like the echo of thoughts, unfinished sentences that hung in the air like fog. My apartment was above the clock shop, and sometimes, even with every clock broken, I could hear faint ticking beneath the floorboards, slow and steady. Around that time, I met Marino, a waitress at the diner near the highway. She was one of the few people who didn't act strange. Her laugh was tired but real. She told me she grew up here, left for a while, then came back when her father fell ill. She warned me, though said people don't really leave Harrow Creek. The town keeps something from you, something it doesn't give back. I thought she meant guilt or regret. I didn't understand until much later. One night, Marino and I walked through the old cemetery behind the church. The fog was so thick it felt alive, curling around our ankles like it had purpose. That's when I noticed something strange. The ground wasn't flat. It was rippled, like waves frozen mid-motion. She said no one digs there anymore because the ground hums when you dig too deep. I pressed my ear to the soil. There was a low, steady vibration, faint as breathing. It wasn't the earth moving. It was something beneath it, waiting. Back then, I still thought I could reason my way through the weirdness. I even kept a journal, noting every strange occurrence, every sound, every pattern. The problem was, each entry I wrote was already written before. The ink would be dry, the pages filled with my handwriting, even before I touched the pen. That's when the scratches appeared. Long, deep marks carved into my bedroom floor, curved and deliberate. At first, I thought it was rats or warped wood, but when I crouched down, I saw letters forming my name and Marino's carved in jagged lines. The air grew colder as I watched. The marks seemed to pulse slightly like veins under skin. I ran to Marino's apartment, desperate to show her, but she wasn't there. The window was open, the curtains fluttering like they were breathing. I saw the faint outline of footsteps leading into the woods behind her building, small and deep, like she was dragged. I followed them. The forest behind Harrow Creek doesn't feel natural. The trees bend inward, their branches forming shapes that almost look human. As I walked, I could hear faint voices calling names, mine, hers, others I didn't know. I followed the trail until I found the old mine entrance, sealed decades ago after an explosion. The wooden boards covering it were splintered open, freshly broken. I could smell something foul, metallic, and wet. I called out, but the only answer was a sound like breathing from inside the tunnel. I don't know why I went in. Maybe I thought Marino needed me, or maybe something else guided me. Inside, I found old tools scattered across the ground, rusted and blood-stained. The air was thick, humming again, that same pulse from the cemetery. I felt dizzy, like the air itself was bending. I heard whispering, my own voice, repeating words I hadn't said yet. It was telling me to turn back, but ahead, I saw a faint light flicker. I followed it and found Marino standing motionless. Her eyes were open, but empty. Her lips moved slowly, forming words without sound. I reached for her hand. It was ice cold. Then I noticed the walls around us. Every surface was carved with names, thousands of them, layered on top of each other. All written in the same hand. Mine was there too. The light dimmed, the whispering grew louder, and the ground started trembling. I realized what the hum was. It was the heartbeat of something buried deep. The town wasn't built over a mine. The mine was carved into something that had been here long before us, something alive. I tried to pull Marino out, but the walls shifted and the tunnel closed behind me. The air grew thick, suffocating. I screamed her name, but my voice came back distorted, older, like someone else was using it. The next thing I remember, I was outside again, lying near the churchyard. The sun was rising, and all the clocks in town were ticking again, for the first time since I'd arrived, but they were all moving backward. No one believed me when I tried to tell them. The bar was empty, the diner boarded up, and Marino's apartment was gone, like it never existed. The town was quieter than ever, and the people who remained wouldn't look at me. Some crossed the street when they saw me. Others whispered my name as if it were a curse. That night, I returned to my apartment. The scratches on the floor were gone. The clocks were silent again. I sat there listening to the stillness when I heard faint knocking under the floorboards. 3 soft taps, then silence, then 3 more. I leaned down, pressing my ear against the boards, and heard her voice whisper my name from far below. The sound of ticking returned, faint but steady. I looked around and realized every clock in the room now worked perfectly, their hands spinning faster and faster, all stopping at the same moment. 2:17 a.m. That was the moment I realized the clocks weren't broken. They were keeping time for something else. The next morning, I packed my bag to leave. The road out of town twisted endlessly like it never ended. I drove for hours, but somehow I kept passing the same sign, "Welcome to Harrow Creek, population 147. Then 146, then 45. Each time I looked, the number dropped by 1. I stopped counting when it reached 1. I think that's me. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear Marino's voice humming in the distance, like the echo of a ticking clock. Sometimes I wake up on the floor, dirt under my fingernails, blood under my nails, and scratches forming new names beside mine. I stop trying to clean them. I just wait now, listening for the hum beneath the floor, waiting for time to stop again. And it always does, at the same time. 2:17 a.m. I always thought I understood fear, but that was before I moved to Briar Hollow. I came to this town looking for peace, a slower life after too many restless nights in the city. But what I found instead was something older, something that had been waiting long before I was born. I was 20 when I left my hometown behind, packing my old truck with little more than clothes, books, and a camera. I'd been working as a freelance photographer, mostly small gigs, weddings, school portraits, anything that paid the rent. The city noise had eaten away at me, the sirens, the shouting neighbors, the dull ache of sleepless nights. So when I saw an ad for a cheap place in a quiet Appalachian town, I thought it was my chance to breathe again. Briar Hollow wasn't even on most maps. The road there wound through dense pine woods, past creeks that glimmered like strips of glass beneath the fading sun. When I arrived, I found a town frozen somewhere in the 1970s. Faded signs, peeling paint, a diner with a flickering neon clock that never seemed to change. The people were polite, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. My house sat at the edge of town, part of a row of old duplexes that faced the forest. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, and at night the wind carried a soft whistling sound through the trees. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, though sometimes it almost sounded like someone calling a name. For the first few weeks, life was quiet. I'd wake early, walk the dirt trail by the creek, take pictures of fog rolling over the hills. The locals waved, but few stopped to talk. They gathered at the Rusty Lantern, a small bar near the gas station, where old men played cards and told stories about the mountains. Stories about miners who vanished underground, or hunters who followed tracks that led in circles until they came upon their own footprints. I loved listening to them. One night I joined their table, camera bag slung over my shoulder, just wanting to feel part of something again. The men looked at me with tired eyes, half amused, half pitying. One of them, a wiry man with a white beard, leaned forward and said something that froze me for a moment. He said, "You'll learn soon that this place doesn't like strangers." Then, just as I opened my mouth to reply, He finished my sentence before I could even speak the words. His voice matched exactly what I was about to say, word for word. The others laughed softly, but I couldn't. When I walked home that night, I passed the town square where the big clock stood above the post office. The hands were stopped at 11:14 p.m. I checked my phone. It was past midnight. I thought it was just broken, but the next morning when I passed it again, the clock still read 11:14. That was the first time I noticed it. The clocks in Briar Hollow were always stuck, every one of them. The diner clock, the gas station, the one on the church tower. But here's the strangest part. They only froze when I was alone. If someone else stood beside me, the second hand would start ticking again, slow and steady, as if mocking me. I tried not to think much of it. I told myself small towns had quirks, that maybe the clocks were old or connected to some faulty power line. But deep down, something cold began to settle in my chest. The days grew shorter as winter came. Nights stretched long and heavy, and the forest outside my window started to feel alive. Some nights I'd wake to tapping sounds, faint but rhythmic, coming from the glass. Once I thought I saw a shadow pass between the pines, tall and thin, but when I blinked, it was gone. It was around this time that I met my neighbor, Clara. She was older than me, maybe in her 30s, and lived alone with a golden retriever named Hank. She worked at the local library and had a calm, steady way of speaking that made me feel grounded. We became friends fast, often sitting on her porch drinking tea while Hank dozed at our feet. One evening, she told me about the Hollow's history. Long before the town existed, she said, settlers had vanished here whole families. Some claimed they went into the woods following strange lights. Others said they were taken by something that lived beneath the roots. I laughed nervously, thinking she was trying to spook me, but her expression didn't change. That night, after she went inside, I saw something that made my skin crawl. On my floor, near the couch, were long scratches. At first I thought Hank had wandered in somehow, but the marks were too deep, too deliberate, as if carved by something sharp. When I crouched closer, my breath caught in my throat. The scratches formed letters. My name. I cleaned them up the next morning, trying to convince myself I'd been half asleep, that maybe I'd dragged something heavy and forgotten. But the next night, new scratches appeared, this time deeper, forming another name. Clara. I didn't tell her. I didn't want to scare her or sound insane. A week later, something happened that pushed me past fear into something worse certainty. It was late, maybe 2:17 a.m., when I woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Soft, measured, like someone walking barefoot on wood. I froze, listening. The steps stopped just outside my window. Then came that tapping again, slow, deliberate. I forced myself to look. There was a man standing there, his face half hidden by the darkness. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes caught the dim light like an animal's. He was smiling, but his smile was wrong, stretched too wide, his teeth too many. I blinked, and he was gone. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the dark till morning, watching the woods, waiting for movement. When dawn came, I went outside, and there in the frost on the window pane were finger marks, 3 long streaks ending in claw-like points. I told myself to leave, to pack my bags and go, but something kept me there. Maybe it was the strange pull of the hollow, or maybe it was because Clara seemed unbothered by it all. She told me I just needed rest, that the forest could play tricks on tired minds, but then Hank disappeared. We searched all day, calling his name through the woods. Near dusk, we found his collar hanging from a low branch, the metal tag bent as if crushed by something powerful. Clara cried, clutching it to her chest. I stood beside her, feeling a hollow dread spreading through me like rot. That night, I stayed awake. Around 7:45 p.m., I saw lights moving between the trees, faint like lanterns. At first I thought it was searchers, but the lights moved wrong, too fast, weaving through the trunks like fireflies with purpose. Then came the whispering. Faint, echoing, like voices carried through the wind. Come back. The same voice I'd heard that night. I ran to Clara's house, pounding on her door, but no one answered. Her windows were dark. I turned the knob. It wasn't locked. Inside, the house was cold. The air smelled of damp earth, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. I called her name again, softer this time. Then I saw it. On her living room floor, deep scratches, forming my name again beside hers. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. The screen showed an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Static filled the line, followed by a low voice, rasping, distant. It said my name, then laughed softly. The sound wasn't human. The next morning, Claire was gone. The sheriff organized a search, but they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle, nothing except her broken teacup lying near the porch. People in town started avoiding me. The men at the Rusty Lantern stopped talking when I walked in. One of them muttered under his breath that outsiders always bring it back. I asked what he meant, but no one answered. That night, the clocks in my house all stopped again, every one of them, their hands frozen at the same time, 11:14. Something changed after that. I began hearing noises under the floorboards, soft scratching like nails on wood. The tapping returned, sometimes from inside the walls. Once I heard whispering coming from the vents, voices repeating my own words seconds after I spoke them. I tried to record it, but every time I played the tape back, there was nothing but static. One evening I drove out of town, desperate to escape, but when I reached the old highway, the fog grew thick, swallowing the road ahead. My GPS froze, the screen flashing 11:14 again and again. I turned back, heart pounding. But somehow, no matter which turn I took, I ended up back in Briar Hollow. It was as if the town wouldn't let me leave. Days blurred together. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Every night I heard footsteps circling the house, the same slow rhythm. The scratching on the floor spread across the room, carving shapes I couldn't recognize. Circles, spirals, names I didn't know. Then came the voices again, this time inside the house. They whispered in corners, under the bed, behind the bathroom mirror. Sometimes I saw movement from the corner of my eye, thin figures standing just beyond the doorway, gone when I turned. One night, I found a letter on my porch. The paper was damp, the handwriting jagged and uneven. It said, "We were here long before you, and we never left." I burned it, but the words stayed in my mind. By the next week, I'd stopped going outside. My food ran low. The town grew silent, as if everyone had vanished. Even the birds stopped singing. The only sound left was the wind through the pines and that slow, steady tapping at my window. I don't know how long it's been since then. Days, weeks. The clocks haven't moved. My phone battery died long ago, and the sun feels like it sets earlier each day. Sometimes I hear Clara's voice calling from the woods, soft and pleading. Last night, I gathered the courage to step outside. The forest was still, the air thick with mist. I walked toward the creek, guided by faint lights ahead. They flickered like lanterns again, weaving between the trees. I followed, unable to stop myself. Then I saw them, the old men from the bar standing in a circle. Their eyes were blank, their mouths moving in unison, whispering words I couldn't understand. In the center of the circle lay the broken remains of Hank's collar, glowing faintly. When they saw me, they smiled. And each one spoke the exact words I was about to say next. I turned to run, but the lights surrounded me, closing in, whispering, "Come back." I woke up on my couch this morning, covered in dirt and pine needles. My floors covered again in scratches. Deep ones. They spell out something new this time. Welcome home. Now, as I write this, the clocks around me have stopped again, frozen at 11:14. I can hear footsteps on the porch, slow and patient. If you ever pass through the Appalachians and find a town called Briar Hollow, don't stop. Don't even look toward the woods, because once you do, it looks back, and it never forgets.